Hey folks, Nikon have just formalized their Z6 and Z7 cameras. In this video I want to talk to you specifically about the Z6. This is the all-rounder and I think it's up to an even tougher challenge than the Z7 because that puts it head-to-head with the Sony A7iii that Sony threw everything in the kitchen sink at and kept it under $2,000. In this video let's compare the two of them and its closest Nikon DSLR rival, the D750. Now, I have to start this video by saying thank you so much, Sony. They have put in all of this R&D. They have come so far from their first generation of cameras to their current lineup of A7 III, A7R III, and A9, which are phenomenal cameras and a world away from where they started out. And I guess knowing that Canon and Nikon were coming out with their version soon, they brought out the A7 III and didn't hold anything back. Actually, that's not true. They held a couple of things back and there are significant points of differentiation to the Z6. But still, they put so much into the camera and kept it under $2,000. They could have easily charged $500 or $600 more than that and it would have still been a compelling value proposition. But having put so much into it, they really put the pressure on Nikon. And I have to say, I think Nikon has responded really well with the Z6 because, and this is not any kind of, giving them a get out of jail free card. It's just acknowledging the fact that they're a really old school company and they don't act the same way as Sony. But I think Sony has forced them to, and us as the consumers, whether you're Sony or Nikon or Canon or whatever, it's going to help the whole market and the value that we're going to be expecting is going up. So it's a good thing. So, first of all, I'm looking specifically at the Z6 here. If you want to hear about the Z7, check the card above and check out the video I did comparing it to the A7R III. If you've already watched that one, some of this will be duplicated because there's a lot of similarities in what we're talking about here. So, big new thing on the Z series is their new lens mount, obviously, other than it being a mirrorless camera. The big lens mount giving us some different potentials and a longer term future. I'm going to talk in a separate video about lenses and what I think we might expect from that mount in the next 3 to 5 years. Let me know if you'd like to hear that one. Let's talk first, and again, there is going to be some duplication between this and the last video. What I think are the biggest selling points for the Nikon coming into the market in 2018, trying to get people like me or people that have already shifted to Sony or people that are thinking about do they want to go mirrorless, whether they're a Nikon shooter or a DSLR shooter or whatever, and are now going to be looking at the market and comparing all of their options. Nikon has an advantage in terms of ergonomics and weather sealing. If you're talking about comparing their DSLRs to, say, the top of the line Sony mirrorless cameras, I think that's just hard to argue against. The Nikon, say, D850 is better ergonomically, even though it's bigger and heavier. The handling, in my opinion at least, is better. And it's definitely better weather sealed. And the Z6 looks like it's retained almost the same grip as the D850, and they say has the exact same weather sealing, dust and moisture resistance as the D850. That's a big thing for a $2,000 camera, and it's not something that the other Nikons even can boast about. So I think that's going to be a really big thing for them. Now, first of all, the Z6, as I said, it's their all-rounder. So rather than the big 45, 47 megapixel like the Z7, we're talking 24.5 megapixel, which is enough for most people and in most situations. If you're a high resolution whore like me, then you want to be looking at the Z7. But the Z6 is giving you 100 to 51,200 ISO range, expandable down to 50 and up to 204,000 like you ever really need that. That it's exactly the same as the A7 III and way ahead of the D750, which is looking long in the tooth when you start to compare it to this guy. In terms of the sensor itself, they say it's a brand new sensor that hasn't been used before. I would expect it's going to significantly outperform the D750. Compared to the A7 III, it's really hard to say, but it is saying that it has built-in focal plane phase detection autofocus that should exceed the focus capabilities by far of the D750, and we'll have to see how it does comparing it to the A7 III. So the A7 III is a 24 megapixel, just the same. It's about the, in terms of the sensor, they're very similar, the A7 III and the Z6. So many letters and numbers to keep in my head. Now, the AF is where the Z6, again, surges ahead of the D750. The Z7 has 493 focus points. The Z6 has 273, but it still covers 90% of the viewfinder, and the hybrid system between contrast and phase. The new algorithm in its X-Speed 6 processor is meant to work with the new lenses to pick which focus system or use them simultaneously to get you the best results. So that 273 points is compared to the D750's 51 focus points, at which 15 of are cross types. Having said that, now one thing that Sony didn't hold back on the A7 III was the focus system. It's got the same 399 point phase system and 425 point contrast system as the A7R III, which is incredible. So on paper, that's significantly ahead of the Nikon. We'll have to see them side by side. Now, when I use, say, the D850, which is a lot more simple on paper than the A7R III, I've found they both work brilliantly. Different coverage, the Sony is ahead on that, but in terms of focus acquisition and tracking, the D850 does great even with fewer points, so we'll have to see how it all bears out. Now, the Z6 is doing 12 frames a second compared to the D750's 6.5 or the Sony's 10. But note, I'm doing this unfortunately off a press release because I couldn't get to a physical event to ask these questions rapid fire to clarify. They say 12 frames a second in high continuous shooting extended mode. Now, if that's like DSLRs, that might be with limited focus and metering, and we may be looking more like 10 if you want full focus and metering. We'll have to see. The Z6 is using the new X-Speed 6 processor. Like the Z7, they say it's going to give you better sharpness and noise performance. Yeah, to be honest, this doing 12 frames a second at 24 megapixel, I'm not blown away. You know, the Nikon, whatever it was, 1 series, their top of the line one that they recently threw in the trash with this coming up, was a 20 megapixel camera and 18 megapixel camera, but it was doing 20 frames a second, and that was using the X-Speed 4A processor generations ago. So this is doing 12 frames at 24 megapixel. It's relatively a lot less data to be shifting around, so let's see. Now, as I've said so many times, one of the biggest sticking points for Nikon or any DSLR user is the viewfinder. We're so used to an optical viewfinder. Now, this is one place where Nikon have stuck it to Sony. So Sony kept the great autofocus system from the A7R III and put it into the $1,000 cheaper A7 III. Phenomenal. But they didn't keep the same EVF. It's got a much simpler one. So the Sony EVF is 2.3 megapixels. The new Nikon one is going to be 3.7 megapixel OLED with 100% coverage and a 0.8 magnification. It's even higher res and a bigger magnification than the A9, whereas the A7 III is significantly lower res than both the R3, the 9, and now the Z6 and 7. Another one is the rear screen. The rear screen on the Sony A7 III is 920,000 pixels, whereas the new Z6 is 3.2 megapixel touchscreen. So 3.5, 4 times higher res. That can make a huge difference in reviewing your images in the field. So for those of us who are going from an optical viewfinder, having really high quality EVF and rear screen, I think is going to be really important. Along with, as I've already said, the ergonomics and the sealing, which I think are really, really important. And the first 3 lenses that they have announced in their lineup are all also fully sealed to go with the camera bodies. So I think for people wanting a true professional option, having great handling and great sealing is going to be a big selling point for Nikon. So well done to them for doing that. Now, on top of that, they've really pulled out all the stops for video, way ahead of anything they've put out before, and it doesn't look like they've hampered the Z6 compared to the Z7 at all, except that the more simple AF module may not perform as well for video. But we're getting 4K 30p, 1080 at 120p, but it's also giving you 10-bit out via HDMI, as well as log and time coding, two things that we've never had from Nikon cameras before, and now they're, if you're shooting video, that's phenomenal. If you're not, skip that menu item and it doesn't make a difference to the performance of it as a stills camera. It's also going to be compatible with the older batteries. So the ENEL15 that we have in the D810, D500, D750, or the 15A that's in the D850 will both be compatible with the Z6. It's going to be using a 15B variant. And it's coming with a battery grip, or they're developing a battery grip that will take two of them to get more battery life. It doesn't look like the grip is going to give you additional frames per second, but it will introduce USB charging. I couldn't find in the press release if the body itself offers USB charging without the grip. Next, the Z6 is offering 5 stops of in-body image stabilization. It's the first full-frame camera that they're releasing with that from Nikon. They're claiming 5 stops based on CEPA standardized testing. Sony claims 5.5. They do really well, but we'll have to see in reality how it performs and how it pairs up with the existing Nikon lens lineup. Now, something I think is so important is that they nail the adapter. If I'm faced with the option, not that I am, but if I were, of needing to choose between Sony and Nikon, even if I didn't, if you took away a lot of other variables, the fact that I could put an adapter on and then have access to hundreds of Nikon lenses, if it performs well, is a huge selling point over being limited to the current range of what's out there for Sony. But one thing that in Sony's favor, as of 2018, Sigma and Tamron and Samyang, all these brands, and Zeiss are bringing out lenses for their mount, and it might take a little while for Nikon to catch up in that regard. But if their adapter works really well and it performs well with third-party lenses, that's a huge selling point. So we'll have to watch and see how the FTZ mount does. Sorry, the FTZ adapter. In terms of lenses, I'm thinking to do a standalone video on that in future, but at launch, it's going to be available with 3 lenses, the 24-70 f4S, the 50mm 1.8S, and the 35 1.8S. Now, I think it's a bit of a bonehead move releasing all slower lenses at launch. I think that they needed to play up that Pro option, and we're so used to 1.4s and 2.8s being the Pro option. However, they're designating these as S-line, which is now going to be, for this line of cameras, the top of the line. And we're just used to that camera manufacturers put their best glass and their best tech into the 1.4 primes and into the 2.8 zooms, and then that the 1.8 and f4 variants, as well as being 2/3 or a full stop slower, have lower general tech in them. And there's normally a huge price difference. So it's going to be interesting to see, because the Nikon lenses are not cheap. You're looking at $1,000 for the 24-70, whereas the Sony is only $900. But if the performance is more like a premium lens, then consider this, that the f4 from Sony is $900, but the f2.8 G Must is $2,200. So if it's somewhere between them in terms of performance, maybe it's good value, but we don't know yet. The 35mm is going to be $850, again more than double what the Sony is at $400. And the 50mm 1.8, this had better be something special, because they're asking $600 for it. And their current 50mm 1.8 G lens, which is great for DSLRs, is $217, so triple the price. It's going to have to really offer something phenomenal. In terms of future lenses for next year, they're saying there's going to be the 58mm 0.95 Noct. That's going to be manual focus, keep that in mind. The 20mm 1.8, the 85 1.8, 24-70 2.8, 70-200 2.8, and the 14-30 f4. Then in 2020, that's a long time away, the 50mm 1.2 autofocus 24-1.8 and the 14 to 24 f2.8. And I will get into this more in a lens dedicated video if people are interested in that. But with a company with that history of lens development, I'm surprised we're not going to see a fast 50mm until 2020. And even by the end of 2020, we don't have a schedule for an 85 1.4 or 1.2 or a 105 1.4 or 1.2. That, you know, that adapter really has to perform great, because if it doesn't, that means by the end of 2020, they're going to have, what, 12 lenses available, which is a good start, but compared to the hundreds that are currently at Nikon users' fingertips, it's a drop in the ocean. Let me know your thoughts. Have you already shifted to Sony? Are you considering mirrorless? Is this not of interest to you at all? If so, why are you watching? There's always that 5% who just watch to be outraged and hit the dislike button. Stay tuned. After Hong Kong, I'm on my way to Bangkok and then Bhutan to lead a tour. Back to New York, and fingers crossed I'll get these cameras in to test out as soon as possible and potentially take them with me to Europe for some tours I have a little bit later in the year. Do check out the website, sign up to the mailing list, check out the Intimate Portraiture version 2.0 download series. I'll see you soon.